Good morning, good afternoon, and thanks for tuning in wherever you happen to be across the Americas or in Europe or wherever in the world you are. Welcome to an Ask an Expert fireside chat put on by the Global Prebiotics Association as part of our Global Prebiotics Week. So this entire week is our inaugural Global Prebiotics Week. We've been talking and celebrating the prebiotic space, prebiotic science, and here we're going to be asking an expert some questions and engaging in a dialogue about prebiotics and communicating prebiotics and the benefits of prebiotics. My name is Len Monheit. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Prebiotics Association, and I'm with Traci Kantowski, who's the Communications Director for the GPA as well. And we've got a guest as well that I'll introduce in a second. You'll have the ability to chat with us during the course of the next half hour or so. You have the ability to use the Q&A tab to submit questions, or you can actually raise your hand and then we can actually have you live to pose your question to our panelists and moderator. We are live streaming and recording this session, so it's on the GPA YouTube channel. It's being recorded. It'll be incorporated into other communications and messaging by GPA. We want to connect with you. Those are social media tags. And also the GPA website is prebioticassociation.org. About the GPA, we've been around for a little bit over 2.5 years, and we're comprised of scientifically validated prebiotic ingredient companies, manufacturers of ingredients, brand holders, retailers, service companies, and we're focusing on the education and awareness building and stewarding of this emerging category. Our mission is to champion the category by increasing awareness and understanding of the science, supporting both well-known and newfound benefits in this exciting space, and to create the needed transparency about prebiotics and how they act within the microbiome. This is a snap of our member companies. We're global. We represent the supply chain across in food, beverage, supplements. And today, we're actually going to be talking specifically in this fireside chat with Kara Landau, who happens to be GPA's media representative, and she's the nutrition advisor and CEO and head dietitian at her own company, Uplift Foods. Now, I'm now going to turn over to Traci Kantowski, who is going to take it away for the next half hour or so.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Len. And as we get started, as Len said, I am the Communications Director at the Global Prebiotic Association, and we're so excited to have Kara with us and Len along for the ride as well. We plan to have some fun, answer your questions, and chat with all of you. But Kara, as we get started, maybe you could just share with our viewers a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you kind of ended up in the prebiotic space.
With pleasure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kara Landau. I am an Australian registered dietitian, and I'm based here in New York, in America. I have been in the prebiotic space for over a decade now, which is kind of crazy to me. I realized there was this important nutrient that was basically missing from so many people's diets, and that the connection of prebiotics to your gut health and ultimately to so many layers of your health was not well understood, and it wasn't being educated enough. So I've taken it on myself for many years to be, in Len's word, a steward in this category, very active in the media across the globe, and then in more recent times launched Uplift Food, which is a prebiotic functional snacking brand. So now trying to create solutions for people that want to get more prebiotics into their diets. So my background has both the science, but also very much business and consumer-facing branding. So hopefully I can share some of my knowledge and answer some questions today.
Thanks so much, Kara. And yes, just as a reminder, if you have questions, feel free to type those into the Q&A box or the chat box, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you to ask it live. But Kara, we did have some questions submitted in advance that I wanted to go over with you just to kind of kick things off, because we have people eager to know some of this information. And one of the number one things that we get asked all the time is about the prebiotic content in foods. And as a dietitian, you know, obviously you live and breathe that. And I thought maybe could you share just a little bit of information about prebiotic and prebiotic rich foods?
Right. It's been a challenging one my entire life as a dietitian. I've always wanted to advocate foods as the first source of a nutrient. And when it comes to prebiotics, some of the densest sources are foods that are really not regularly consumed. So things like dandelion greens and unmodified potato starch, or cooked and then cooled potatoes. You've got them in chicory root. And so what we're finding is that these foods, which, you know, if I go around to someone and I say, I think you should cook, but then make sure you cool your potato, most people look at you a little bit odd. And you can reheat it though, amazingly. The resistant starch, which is a prebiotic, does remain at that point. But what I'm getting at is that an example such as green bananas are a really rich source of prebiotics in a food. And yet when you recommend someone to eat a green banana, or say, just, you know, don't let it get too ripe, they look at you very strangely. And I don't really blame them, because I didn't particularly enjoy eating green bananas myself. But now what we're finding is that food manufacturers are creating products and ingredients that you can then utilize, such as green banana flour, which can then be used in recipes. And that is therefore a source that you can consume in a food source. But back to the initial statement, is that the most dense sources of prebiotics are not really in foods that are consumed on a daily basis. And it's for that reason that I feel quite strongly that both food and supplement are good ways of getting this particular nutrient into your diet. We know that years and years and years and years ago, people were getting a lot of naturally occurring inulin because they were eating a lot of root vegetables and tubers, and inulin as a source of soluble prebiotic fiber. They were having levels up, it was thought, at around 135 grams a day from natural sources. Now I wouldn't be recommending someone have an isolated form of that in supplement form at that level. But we do know that it was a nutrient that was being consumed years and years and years ago. And as food manufacturing has come into place and people's diets are changing, and you talk about the standard American diet where there's both a lot of fiber going, but also just a lot of the processing, the outer layers of grains, legumes, are being removed, and those nutrients are therefore not there for the consumer to get from food. So yeah, when it comes to food sources, I certainly talk about trying to find ways to, if you can, bring some of these foods and vegetables, legumes back into your diet. And if you can't get them in the levels that are required to meet your daily needs, looking at functional foods and supplements as sources is a great way to get a variety of prebiotics into your diet.
Awesome. And Kara, you mentioned the, as they say, the typical American diet, or the SAD diet, right? A lot of people seem to be following kind of various diet or nutrition programs. Right. Do you find that those, some of the other more typical ones, like keto is super popular right now, et cetera, do those leave you depleted in prebiotics? Like, are people that are following those consuming enough prebiotics, or is that another example where maybe you need to add functional foods, or
You've brought us to a really interesting point, because you can, there's a lot of people that say, but I'm eating a healthy diet, so I must be getting everything I need. But if you've keto, paleo diets had their time, low carb in general, when you start removing whole grains, legumes, starchy vegetables as well, which can be sources, you really are removing a lot of the naturally rich sources of prebiotics. You certainly, if you were like really to a T incorporating the chicory root and the dandelion greens in your salads, and you were including raw onion, asparagus, in bulk loads, you probably could follow a keto diet and still get your prebiotic intake in. But realistically, most people are not focused on that. And it's actually probably the reason why you see some brands that promote keto diets, they've actually come out with prebiotic supplements to go hand in hand, because often the case when people cut out these carbohydrate foods, they often cut out a lot of the fiber and the resistant starch-rich foods. It doesn't have to be that way, but it's often a natural progression. So yes, Traci, the answer is people are often lacking in prebiotics when they're following these specialty diets. And although there may be some benefits to them for a particular individual, we don't need to go into any of that today. The reality is that if you are following those diets, it's important to still look at prebiotics as their own nutrient and make sure that you're consuming enough and a variety.
Thanks. Kara, we at GPA recently conducted research among consumers, and there's, among supplement consumers at least, there's an 81% awareness of prebiotics, right? So it's growing, people understand it. But as a dietitian, and that's kind of your world, that's who you're talking to, what's the average kind of level of familiarity do you feel among dietitians about prebiotics? Do they understand?
Yeah.
Do they understand even what you were talking about, that the foods that people typically eat don't have the right prebiotic content in them?
I don't believe that as an industry there is a deep enough knowledge yet. I know that there is a desire to learn about it. I know there is a desire to incorporate more fruits and vegetables, to incorporate more foods that would provide polyphenols and antioxidants. And, we know that more emerging groups of prebiotics can be found in some of those, from those nutrients as well. It's not necessarily just from the fibrous sources. And so I do know that there's a desire to learn. Whenever someone will promote a gut health session and a session on prebiotics, the room's full. But when we see media interviews being performed and information going out about how you can quite easily hit your prebiotic needs by just eating a healthy diet and having a regular salad or something like that, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so I do think there's still a level of education that is needed for the experts so that they can then pass on that information to others.
So companies in the prebiotic space, do you have any recommendations for them on what they can do to educate this super important community?
Oh, I believe that communication is key here, creating events, doing outreach, creating as part of a marketing plan or as part of a social media marketing plan, talking to those groups of influencers and providing them with the education, because as I said, they often want it. And they're humble enough to say, I don't know all of this. I haven't been met with dietitians that have come back and said, no, I think I know everything. It's more, I'd love to learn more. So I think that, at Uplift Food, we certainly have a lot of contact with registered dietitians, and also particularly as a brand that's talking to a younger consumer, we also target they call themselves RD to Bs, so the dietitians to be, and they've got a little hashtag online, and they all talk to each other and they talk to their friends as well. So they really are quite influential even before they've got that credential. And so talking to that wave of young dietitians, I think is very good, because they want to be at the forefront. They want to be the nutrition expert, and they know that this is a category that's growing. They know that there is science that is growing. It's not just a trend. It's real. And so if you can be the brand that educates them, they're going to be your ally for life. They're going to like that you helped them be at the forefront, and it gave them that knowledge that they could then be the expert in their community as well.
For sure. And Len, you and I actually experienced that last year when in-person shows still existed, right? When we were, when that was still a thing. That was like just about a year ago when we were at the Fancy conference.
We did. And yes, the curiosity was off the charts, which was so reassuring. The other aspect that was interesting was when one of our beck and call to some of the dietitians to interact with us was, what do you know about prebiotics? I mean, many admitted not enough, nothing at all. And some tried to correct us and say, you mean probiotics? And we said, no, prebiotics.
I've been corrected many times. People thought because of my accent that I was maybe mispronouncing. So I've had to make it very clear that no, we definitely mean prebiotics.
For sure. And actually on that point, probiotics did somewhat pave the way, right? To lay the groundwork for education, et cetera, and for people to being open to that. But it was very much focused on gut health. And with prebiotics, we're seeing that there's much more beyond just digestive health in terms of, and Kara, that's one of the things that I think you've focused on throughout your entire career with the mind-body connection, but also with even your brand, right? Uplift itself is
right.
Could you share a little bit about that in terms of how do we go beyond just digestive health?
I think that when you're talking to more of a mass market, I think that that going for the gut health, the connection with probiotics, even digestive health in general is usually the easiest step in, and it's the easiest for someone to wrap their head around. Also, because if you're going to connect prebiotics with fiber, people think about fiber with digestion. People seem to connect digestion with gut health, even though there's lots of differences here as well. And so I do think that it's important if you do want to go down a different route, which is a great thing. It means you differentiate yourself. You need to make sure that you've got, one, the science, and two, it's marketing, it's storytelling. You need to know how to simplify the science in a way that people can relate to. So, as you said, at Uplift Food, I've connected the gut-brain connection. It clearly is stepping, aside from digestion or gut health in as just one of its own. And I think that there's opportunities in immune health. I think that there's opportunities that I think someone will create an opportunity in the sporting category based off some of the anti-inflammatory information. I mean, there's just so many ways that prebiotics and their benefits can go. I could get excited if I put on my marketing hat right now. But the point that I'm getting at is that I think that you need to just get the science so that you have some integrity, but then work out the really simple message, because when you start to go into, well, this compound is produced and this has the anti-inflammatory effect here and this pathway leads to that, it's not a brand story. And consumers can't connect to it's too much, and you actually make people, if someone feels naive, they're going to end up stepping away from the brand. You don't want to isolate them and make them feel like they don't get it. So I just would recommend always pick your niche area. You can go beyond gut health. If you're in the supplement space, you obviously have a lot more room to move when it comes to the messaging. In food, and functional food, it's a lot more boxed in, obviously based on claims, but the story that you tell and the way that you simplify the message is ultimately how the brand can tell their unique story and get away from just being overarching gut health.
And I think that's a good point. That concept of simplification, right, is super key, especially in a category like prebiotics, where many of the ingredients, right, have super long, complicated names. So, do you have any recommendations for companies in terms of, maybe they focus on the benefit? Because if you're talking about, oligosaccharides, right, that's a big word.
Yeah, it's almost sad to me that because the words are long and they sound scientific, that can be a turn off when there's messaging these days where people say if you can't pronounce it, then it's not good for you. And I think, well, we could learn how to pronounce this word and you realize it's really good for you. And so I suppose there's two parts here. I think when it comes to supplements, again, you have a little bit more room to move. I think the supplement consumer is open to learning about a bit more about the science and why your particular ingredient and this prebiotic, even if it has a long name, is going to be beneficial. And as you said, Traci, focusing on the benefit less so than the process, the pathway, the method, the mechanism of action is the term that I know the GPA has used. I don't know if using the mechanism of action as when you're forward facing to a consumer is the best way to go. I think nailing in on the benefit is why someone will be attracted to a product and want to try it. I think when it comes to food, there's so many more layers here, and it depends on who the consumer is that you're talking to. And what I mean by that is at Uplift Food, I incorporate more whole food or whole food sounding ingredients. So what I mean by that is I'll use green banana flour or I'll use lupini beans as ingredients, which are whole foods, or even as a close to a whole food, I'll use soluble tapioca fiber, which is an isolate, but you can hear the vegetable there, as opposed to incorporating what we have in supplements, such as a xylo-oligosaccharide, which is an incredible prebiotic, and the dosage is very low, and I'm very passionate about it, but I don't put that in food products because I don't think that the food consumer would like to see that long word, that the consumer that talks to Uplift Food. If you were a brand that's more targeted at sports, or, you know, where it's like food crossing over to supplement, where there's bars and other items like that, I think that you have a bit more room to move if you're talking to a different consumer.
And on that note of the consumer, Len, GPA just conducted some consumer research recently. And when we were looking at the benefits, and I know you just actually presented on this last week or 2 weeks ago at a microbiome conference on some of the new research on prebiotic benefits. But when they're looking for ingredients, if I remember correctly, the number one thing they were looking for was just simply that it was labeled a prebiotic.
Absolutely, Traci. And I mean, remember that these are prebiotic, so these are supplement consumers. So to Kara's point, that they're looking for a little bit of a different messaging and approach, but the recognition of the term prebiotic by these consumers is increasing. It was the number one feature that they were looking for in a label, followed very closely by a combination of pre and probiotics and symbiotics, rather than what might be the case in some food categories where you may expect that it's part of the fiber conversation. So the supplement consumer across the countries that we investigated was looking and recognizing the term prebiotic.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Kara, one of the things I want to get into, and, you know, we're seeing this, right? Like, for those of us that are in the US, and I know we have, you know, some news going on right now about a presidential election, and it's it's causing stress for people, and we have COVID, and that's causing stress. But there's new research and exciting research out there again, and that you've already incorporated into your own brand about that kind of the gut brain connection and all that. And I would love to just unpack that a little bit more, because it's really exciting area, and I think people could really benefit from it, to knowing more about that.
Yeah, the science that has been termed psychobiotics, which is it looks at nutrition, it also looks at exercise and how you can influence your microbiome and how that can have an impact on your mental health. And it's amazing to watch the science just keep growing and growing and growing and growing. It's clearly an area of deep interest, especially as depression and anxiety and stress, as you say, is sadly continuing to increase in today's world. We know that there's a bidirectional relationship. So we know that when you're stressed, it actually can cause dysbiosis, so a change in your gut bacteria in a negative way. And we know that when you have a poor diet, if you have that dysbiosis, it can lead to inflammation in the body, and that inflammation is connected to anxiety and depression. So it really is like you can change it up from both sides. So if you can they show if you do yoga and meditation and things that can calm your mind, you actually can improve your gut health. And this has been tested a lot on people that have irritable bowel syndrome or other digestive discomfort conditions. And then the other way around, it's shown that if you have a poorer diet, it leads to these more inflammatory molecules being produced, and that often can be from the probiotics releasing these inflammatory molecules, and they lead, as I said, to inflammation that goes to the brain, that is connected to anxiety and depression. So it's a really interesting field. There's more than one way that these pathways connect. We know that we have a vagus nerve that's a direct connection, but we also know that when you have prebiotics in your diet, and especially those, that have a bifidogenic effect, and we produce what's called butyrate and other short chain fatty acids, those metabolites are able to actually have a positive influence on our mental health. They affect our brain health. So again, like as a brand, we wouldn't go into so many layers there, because on a food package, you just wouldn't write this. But, as a brand, we have a big smiley face on our packaging and even on our cookies. And I talk to people about how it's a whole nutrient thing. Prebiotics are definitely, in my mind, one of the strongest components, but I think it's important to be aware that this is a growing science, and it's really about whole nutrition. It's looking at antioxidants, polyphenols, or anything that will produce an anti-inflammatory effect within the body ultimately has a positive effect on our mental health.
Thanks. And as a dietitian, where are you going to find out information about that? Like, I know you're seeking it out, but continuously in terms of, monitoring for the science or the new research or the ingredients that you're considering using, or as we think about prebiotic mechanisms, right? More and more foods are being discovered to have prebiotic benefit or actions. Where are you going to get that information? How do you stay up to date?
Oh, I mean, I'm a bit of a science nerd, and so I just go and literally look up in journals what's coming out, and I think it's not going to be that useful for people, is that, like, because people know that I'm so into this space, people share things with me, like wanting me to learn. So I suppose how we can spin that to be of benefit to the audience is that, especially if you're looking to create a product, talking to ingredient suppliers who are running a lot of research themselves, that's certainly one way of going about being at the forefront. I think that when you're in with good relationships with solid ingredient suppliers that you can trust, that have full scientific teams behind them in order to support the claims that they share with you, you can make when you utilize their ingredients. I think that has been a really valuable way of industry coming together with science, coming together with brands to keep them at the forefront.
Yeah. And we actually, for those of you listening, as you hopefully know, it's Global Probiotics Week, and our theme for tomorrow is science. So I would encourage you all to follow that Global Probiotics Week, because we've got some new and exciting studies that have been shared with us that we would like to share with all of you, and we'll be posting that on social all day tomorrow. Len, you've done a really good job, I think, yourself, of trying to stay abreast of like the latest science, always seeing what's out there as the head of GPA, making sure that we're on track to be at the cutting edge of what's happening in the field of prebiotics.
And there's so much being published, whether it's directly on prebiotics or it's microbiome modulation, and you have to dig through and try to get an understanding. And I'm a generalist. I'm not deep into the tech and into the intricacies of mechanisms and what the potential is. But yeah, it's emerging. GPA is managing and building a research database. We're intending to be a resource for those that are trying to keep up to date. We're active on social. But it's very difficult, and it's global. This movement is global. There's a lot of things that are happening in microbiome research, many of them including prebiotics.
Thanks. So I know, Kara, we really appreciate your time and know how incredibly valuable it is. And we are coming up to the end of our time, but I want to ask you, what are you most excited about in the world of prebiotics? Because we always like to ask people that question, and it's constantly evolving, but what excites you the most?
The most, there's so many things. I'm really passionate, and I'm excited at the growing momentum towards the category, that people are talking about it, that people are wanting to understand it more, that it is starting to be, as you say, when you've done your research, that people are looking for it, and that word on packaging, I mean, that's already a shift in and of itself. So I myself am, really excited about more people understanding, getting excited about this nutrient in this category, and ultimately consuming more of it so that they can reap the benefits.
Len, I have to ask you that same question. What's exciting you these days in this space of prebiotics?
So the volume of research, the application of technology, the fact that we're moving towards some personalization, general awareness increasing, how important the microbiome is, and then how important prebiotics are within the microbiome, adoption. So we're seeing product incorporation. We're at this intersection point. We're playing in so many of put this in context. We as the prebiotic community are playing at this intersection of so many of these categories that are more and more important in these challenging times. Not to exploit, which is one of the reasons the GPA exists, to make sure that there's not exploitation so that we're stewarding, but we're at that juncture of so many of these important health categories that are only going to increase and grow, and we're going to see accessible products proliferate to consumers who really need these products.
Awesome. Thank you. So this was the third of our Ask an Expert session, and I'm super glad that we were able to cover off the questions that were sent to us in advance. If you still have questions, those of you on the line, feel free to submit those in on our prebioticassociation.org. We recorded all three of our Ask an Expert sessions today. So we started very early this morning, US time, mid-morning in the UK, had one a couple hours ago, and now this one with Kara. And they're all going to be available on the GPA YouTube channel, so you can catch up on the latest. And feel free to email us. As we mentioned, tomorrow is Science Friday. We'll be sharing some of the latest science and research. And Saturday, we wrap up our week with just some general information about what's happening in the exciting world of prebiotics. But it doesn't end after this week ends, just because we have 1 week dedicated to prebiotics. We encourage you to celebrate, use them, formulate, buy them, take them, etc., all year long, and continue to engage with us. But Kara, thank you so much for your time today. We're incredibly grateful to have you with us, and advocating and being really a steward, as you say, of this category. And Len, it's always a pleasure to have you online too. But thank you, everyone, and have a great day, and continue to connect with us and use that hashtag Global Prebiotics Week. And we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Bye.